Hello, let us continue our discussion on the poetry of T.S. Eliot. In my last lecture, I have considered Eliot as a classicist, as a new critic, and as a modernist, and howsoever these patterns of writing can be classified in Eliot's writing. So let us consider this particular matter with some specific references. You see, that in Eliot's writing, we can find that there are ample references of the metaphysicals. Probably you have heard of a particular text that was written by T.S. Eliot himself, and it was the Metaphysical Poets. In that particular text, Eliot actually propounded his particular theory of the unification of sensibility and dissociation of sensibility. I will discuss it later. But ultimately, Eliot himself pointed out that what we can trace in the metaphysical poets like John Donne and others, the particular kind of unification of sensibility, that is the sense and ability to be specific, all these were present in the metaphysical authors. These are found to be present in the French symbolists like Jules Laforgue and Racine and Baudelaire. And at the same time, these features can also be found to be present in some of the modern writers. At the time of T.S. Eliot, the modern writers means, Tennyson and others. But fundamentally, we, the readers, can identify that these features of, the metaphysicals, the patterning, the thought and ability and feeling and thought, all these things have been, conjugated into something one. All these features of the metaphysicals can also be traced in the writing of T.S. Eliot, because Eliot himself was very much influenced by the metaphysical formation of writing. Okay, what Samuel Johnson actually did to the metaphysicals regarding his discussion on Abraham Cowley, the metaphysical, the very term that he coined as a derogatory term, it was revived. The future of the metaphysicals was revived by T.S. Eliot through his essay, The Metaphysical Poets. And we can find the basic orientations of the metaphysicals can also be classified or found to be present in Eliot's writing too. The next one that I have pointed out here, it is the French symbolism. As I have pointed out, you will find that in Eliot's writing, say for example, the preludes. Okay, preludes are in your syllabus, and you will find the in prelude there are ample references of Baudelaire's writing. Ultimately the Baudelaire's writing can be found to be classified in Eliot's writing too. So it is not simply Baudelaire that I am trying to suggest here, but at the same time, you will find that in other texts by T.S. Eliot, there are ample references of Jules Laforgue and Racine and others like the French symbolists. Symbolism has to be treated as one of the most important facets of Eliot's writing. And we can find some affinity, you can find some kind of resemblance between Eliotian writing, a formation of writing poetry, and the writings of the French symbolists, to be specific. Now, let us concentrate on some of the theories that Eliot himself actually propounded. Say, for example, the first one is Eliot's conception of tradition. What I'm trying to suggest here, you see, there is one particular text, it is in your syllabus, you will read it in your CC-T12 paper, that is the criticism paper, and the title of this essay is Tradition and Individual Talent. And as we know that this particular text was published under Sacred Wood. Generally, in this particular text, Eliot is trying to propound his theories or ideas of tradition. Here it is not the appropriate position for me to discuss tradition in detail. Rather, I will discuss it when I will go with tradition and individual talent in detail. But here, in a nutshell, I must say that Eliot, with the concept of tradition, he is trying to relate the present text with the past. And he is trying to mean there, it is not, I'm quoting Eliot, it is not simply the pastness of the past, but its presence that is important. That means when we are writing something, when you are using a particular phrase, when we are dealing with a particular ideology, do you not think that this particular word is bearing a particular kind of a cultural heritage along with it? True. Just like Mikhail Bakhtin's theory of dialogism, we can find in Eliot's writing there are ample references of other texts. Say for example, if you go with Eliot's The Wasteland, you will find there are, say, a numbers of texts. Okay, it is not less than, say, 50 texts being referred in Eliot's writing, that is The Wasteland. So what does he try to mean here with the concept of tradition? He says tradition itself is a continuous flux. It's a kind of an order. When a new text is being oriented, a new text is being published, then we will find that the text is actually being placed in this particular order, and the prevalent order or the previous order, it got changed, or kind of a reshaping of the order is taken place. So what is trying to mean here? The historical sense is very important. That means how so far the past experience, how so far the past text, that means say for example, you are reading a particular text in the modern scenario and you can find that this particular text has its collection or with connection with, say, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. It might be possible. So this ultimate idea of tradition, with this particular concept of tradition, Eliot is trying to show that whenever we are reading a text in the modern period, it is not that we cannot relate this text with the ancient one, because it is a kind of a circular pattern that is actually being oriented. When we read the modern text, we can find some references, some portions, or maybe the whole concept being incorporated to the earlier one. And that's why you will find, when you will go with the Holomen, then you will find the Pro Vita Nova. This particular text is being oriented there. It is Dante, Divine Comedy, the part of Divine Comedy being oriented. You will find in most of the texts, there are references of, epigraphs. Okay, say for example, penny for the old guy. You will find it is indicating towards the Guy Fawkes. Say for example, Mr. Courage, he dead. You will find that this particular implication is actually focusing on Heart of Darkness. It is also in your syllabus. So ultimately, what I'm trying to suggest here, that Eliot is never with the particular view that the modern texts are completely different from the earlier one. Rather, the orientation got changed. And whenever you will deal with reading these texts, you need to identify these links. And for that identification, you need to know something about the concept of tradition that Eliot is orienting there. I will discuss it again in detail when I will go through the text, tradition, and individual talent. In this particular essay, in the second part of this essay, Eliot is orienting towards the depersonalization or impersonal theory. As I have in my last lecture, I have completed or pointed out that Eliot says that it is not that what you feel, this must have to be showed or shown in the text. Rather, and he is actually with this particular view that, okay, the poet's mind is just like the shade of platinum in the making of the sulfuric acid. Actually, Eliot took this particular analogy in his essay, Tradition and Individual Talent. He says that when in an experiment, a researcher tries to make or create sulfuric acid, the thread of platinum is very significant because it is working as a catalyst. But when in the presence of that platinum thread, the reaction takes place and the sulfuric acid is being created, we cannot find that thread of platinum or any particular hint of platinum in the created thing. Right? It remained inert, neutral, unaffected. He compares a poet's mind with that thread of platinum. And he says, the poetry is the byproduct. And you cannot find a poet just like the catalyst. Okay. You cannot find the poet in the byproduct itself. Okay, in the presence of the thread of platinum, the sulfuric acid has been mixed up. But just like, in the presence of the poet, ultimately you will find that everything is been amalgamated properly. But ultimately, impersonal theory indicates that poet's mind is important, but don't try to find the poet in the created thing. That means the poetry itself. Regarding this particular thing, he is actually indicating towards another particular concept, the objective correlative. It is not in the tradition and individual talent. Rather, he discussed about objective correlative in Hamlet and his problems. It is another essay by T.S. Eliot. Here also, Eliot pointed that, to keep yourself at far distance from your text, you need the objects that can correlate your thoughts, your ideologies, your emotions. And to justify it, Eliot has given one particular example from Macbeth, and it was the sleepwalking scene. Eliot says that ultimately when we read or maybe watch sleepwalking scene, we can identify what it actually indicates. The mental trauma, the mental crisis, everything. But the words, they are suggestive enough to tell us about the mental condition of Lady Macbeth and also the mental condition of William Shakespeare, to be specific. We needn't have to know everything about the mindset that that William Shakespeare actually felt at the time, but we can get what Shakespeare is trying to mean here. Similarly, you will find that whenever we will go with Eliot's writing, whether it is the Wasteland, whether it is the Hollow Man, whether it is Preludes, Rhapsody on a Windy Night, or maybe the other poems, the famous poems by T.S. Eliot, you will find that somehow we get some snapshots. As if, say, for example, say in your country, in your town, if you take a look at your town, you can find that there are ample references of degenerations and corruptions and pollutions. Now, there are two ways of representing them. One, you will describe them in detail. Two, you will take some snapshots. And the reader, through these snapshots, can make an imaginary collage. And with the formation of that collage, the whole scenario gets overtly reflected in the mind of the reader. So these are the objects that correlate the actual mindset of the poet, and at the same time these can correlate the overall scenario that the poet is trying to interpret. So through these, Eliot is actually orienting the typical formations of impersonal theory or depersonalization. But one thing I have to say here, that Eliot, in his metaphysical poets, Eliot wrote about the poet's mind. Poet's mind is very important. Eliot says that the ordinary mind is chaotic to some extent. But whenever you are thinking in terms of a poet, you will find some disparate experiences are gathered in the formation of poetry. What does it mean? Actually, regarding this particular concept or construct of poet's mind, Eliot is quite similar to that of Coleridgean theory of secondary imagination. Eliot says, say for example, if you are reading Spinoza, the philosopher, it's a tough philosophy of Spinoza, and there is in a bowl there is a rose. The smell of cooking is coming from the kitchen, and someone is working with a typewriter. The sound is there. Eliot says that these are some disparate images or experiences. In a chaotic mind, these remain as chaotic. But it is the function of a poet who can just make it, a kind of a mingling, the intermingling of these disparate experiences and create in the form of a poetry. From these, you can find how surrealism or surrealism exists. Ultimately, these are some mixed up orientations to literature. And you can find the modern theories are also orienting this particular ideology. In also this in this particular text, that is a metaphysical poets, Eliot's idea of dissociation and unification of sensibility, what I have already discussed. This unification of sensibility is the fundamental focus that one should try. What does it mean? Thought and feeling. These are two different orientations throughout literature. Some people could think, and some people could feel. What it actually says. The neoclassicals, they always thought, they never felt. The romantics, they felt, but they never thought. So there are a kind of a breach, a bifurcation is observable. So ultimately you will find that in literature, there was a kind of dissociation of sensibility. The sense and ability, feeling and thought is perceptible. According to Eliot, it was only in the metaphysicals that the unification of sensibility was there. It is not simply the matter of thoughts. It was not simply the matter of the feeling. Rather, both. That unification of sensibility is very important. It is not simply the brain that is in work. Rather, the heart, it was also being present. That was the sole important part of Eliot's writing. You will find both being present there. Now, so far as the orientations of Wasteland is concerned, as you can find here, I'm skipping this one and I will come to that. The Wasteland, as you can find, the kind of a punning is there. The West is being considered as W-A-S-T-E, the Wasteland, a kind of spiritual waste. A decadence is there. A degeneration is there. A spiritual vacuum is there. Everywhere you will find in the typical post-First World War scenario when Eliot is writing his theories, Eliot is writing his poems, he could experience a kind of degeneration is being oriented. A wasteland is being there in each and every perspective, whether it is a love relationship, whether it is sexuality, whether it is psychology, whether it is social relationships, everywhere. You will find the degeneration is always being presented by T.S. Eliot. Remember, we are hollow men. We are stuffed men. We are leaning together with headpiece filled with straw. So that is the basic orientation that Eliot is trying to propound. In your syllabus, there are hollow men. But you need to know that Eliot thought hollow men to be the last part of Wasteland before. It was Ezra Pound who actually reshaped it properly. So that's why whenever you will go with hollow men, you need to know something about the Wasteland. What are the basic orientations of Wasteland? What does Eliot orientate in terms of the spiritual vacuum? In that particular sense, Eliot is indicating towards death in life and life in death existence. That means in your life, you are facing death every time. So ultimately, death and life, these are the two sides of a single coin. And do you think that it is actually indicating towards the mortal death? No, it is the death of your soul. That is the fundamental thing. You see that the typical Anglican orientations to literature can also be felt in Eliot's writing, the religiosity, the typical formations of religiosity. You will find that in Christianity, specifically in Anglicanism, you will find that the fundamental focus is at salvation. It is very needed, a very important part. So ultimately, salvation is needed. And to get salvation, we need to purgate our soul. So that's why the typical living and partly living existence that is propounded or that is being considered or rather expressed by the Canterbury women in the Eliot's play, that is the verse play, verse drama, Murder in the Cathedral, that living and partly living existence, death in life existence is always present in the Wastelanders. And this hollow man cannot cross the river Acheron or Acheron with direct eyes looking at Sharon. All these will be discussed when I will take this particular text. And to purgate your soul, you need to cross river Acheron, you need to cross river Unoi, and then you will enter into Purgatorio, and from there you can get a glimpse towards Paradiso, from where you can get your soul being cleansed. Ultimately, whenever you will deal with Wasteland or maybe Hollow Man, we will find that Eliot throughout, he is orienting towards a kind of a way out, towards salvation. That is the fundamental positive side in Eliot's writing. It is not simply discussing the negative aspects of life. Rather, it is providing a kind of a way out. Do you know that ultimately the Wasteland actually ends with some Sanskrit words? These were taken from Upanishad. And Datta Dadvam Damata, the three these have been pointed out. To give, to sympathize, to control. And with them only, you can achieve the salvation. So it is not simply in the Western metaphysics, rather in the Eastern philosophy, that you can get a glimpse of salvation that Eliot is propounded there. And the holy preaching, as we can know, Eliot ends his text, the Wasteland, with three terms. Datta Dadvam Damata, and it ends with Shanti. It's a preaching, you see. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That has been preached at the end of the Wasteland. So fundamentally, that's why Eliot is a bit tough. To read Eliot, you need to know modernism, to be specific. You need to know Christianity or Anglicanism. You need to know the typical theories that are associated with modernism. You need to know some new critical temperaments, some classical temperaments, some spiritualism, and at the same time, you need to know about some Eastern philosophies that Eliot, or maybe Buddhism, that Eliot actually used in his texts. At the end of this particular lecture, I must refer to the different phases of poetry or Eliot's academic career as a poet. The dedicated book that is very important and significant in Eliot or for Eliot's writing, it is obviously the complete collection of Eliot's texts. It was published under Favor and Favor. But another book that is very significant and very important, it was by Manju Jain, the selected poems and a critical reading of the selected poems of T.S. Eliot by Manju Jain. It was from Oxford publication. You know that throughout Eliot's academic career, as I have mentioned, you will find that it is a kind of a continuous formation of journey. A journey was there, a kind of a search was there, search towards salvation. So if we can break Eliot's writing, then we will find the first group is considered as proofrock and other observations. There also you will find the poems like Proofrock and Portraits of Lady and Preludes, obviously. Then there are the poems of 1920. So from the first group of poems, that is Proofrock and other observations, you have Love Song of J. Alfred Proofrock, you have Preludes. The second group, that is the poems of 1920s, you do not have any particular text. But then you will get the Wasteland and then you will get the Hollow Man. So Hollow Man is there. But towards, it's a kind of a journey, as I mentioned. In the first half, you will find that it is actually showing the typical form of degeneration that is prevailing throughout the society of England. Then certainly, gradually, you are moving towards Wasteland. That is a masterpiece, as we know. And ultimately, you will find that Wasteland continues with the hollow man, another observations obviously, that actually indicates towards some salvation, and it will be continued in the formation of his aerial poems. There are 4 poems, as you can see: Journey of the Magi, a song for Simeon, Animula and Marina. And then you will find that after this particular poem is over, or this group is over, we will find that Eliot wrote his, you see, the plays like Rock, or maybe the Murder in the Cathedral. And then towards the end of his career, he wrote the uh, East Cocker, Dry Salvages, Burnt Norton, these kinds of writings. The 4 texts are there. Okay. And ultimately, towards the end of this particular text or this particular section, you will find that these texts are considered to be significantly spiritual in its tone, in its touch. So from the very beginning to the end, you will find a significant journey is being incorporated. So far as I have told you regarding something about the Eliot's poetry and also the verse plays, but there are another section, as you can see, and this is the Eliot's critical essays. Okay, so I will discuss them later when I will discuss about tradition and individual talent, that is in your syllabus. Stay attached. Try to know more about T.S. Eliot from Wikipedia, from other sources that you have, and it will be continued through the reading of the poems in our next lectures. Thank you.